Muy buenas tardes a la comunidad de Ingeniería de Sistemas. Estamos con otra presentación la tarde de hoy. Les va a estar platicando sobre su conocimiento personal y profesional de cosas que tienen que ver con política de inteligencia artificial en Europa. Mi gran amiga, muy vieja, pues no digamos que somos viejas, pero pues es más o menos sí. Ilona, I've known her since high school, and there are many stories I won't be telling at this time. I'm extremely honored that she took the time to talk to us, considering that it's Friday evening for them in Finland, and her entire family is now being flexible to accommodate us. But without further ado, I will have Alan tell you more and more formally about Ilona so that we can get started with the seminar. Alan, go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. Welcome everyone for in the seminar. Today we have Ilona Lundström. She received her PhD in Administrative Science at Tampere University School of Management. She is the General Director of the Enterprise and Innovation Department at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Employment of Finland. Prior to her current position, she worked at Tekes, the Finnish founding agency for innovation, now Business Finland. Most recently as Executive Director responsible for all tech services for large companies and research organizations. Before joining Tekes in 2007, she worked in various positions at the Association of Finnish Local and Regional Authorities. Welcome, Ilona. Please go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Warm regards from Finland, Helsinki. It's quite late afternoon here and very early afternoon there at your place, but I'm really happy to be invited to your seminar and being able to give some insight to the European policy making through the case of Finland about digitalization and especially about artificial intelligence. I'm no technology specialist myself. I am policy specialist, but at the same time, I have worked quite a while with technology issues. First, funding, technologies, innovation, and the Finnish Funding Agency of Innovation, and now looking at the possibilities for new technologies, innovation, growth from policy perspective at the ministry in charge of innovation activities and also enterprise financing. To my responsibilities belong also industrial policy questions. And when I talk about digitalization, usually I have the industrial policy glasses on. I thought it would be of interest to you today to discuss the specifics about European policy making, how we see technology policy, digitalization policy, and AI as a general purpose technology as a whole, and what kind of discussions we are having concerning, for example, legislation and enabling both the research that is going on, innovation, and also growth through innovation and new business activities that this kind of technology disruptions enable. We cannot be having this session without mentioning COVID-19 and its role in rapidly increasing digitalization in practical life in different kind of organizations and businesses as well. Digital technologies are an imperative for working, learning, education, entertaining, socializing, shopping, accessing everything, basically from health services to culture. And this is, of course, of interest also to policymakers right now. And in the light of these challenges, also European Commission has been active, and it has presented a vision and targets for successful digital transformation in Europe by 2030 called Europe's Digital Decade. And Europe's ambition is to use digitalization, digital technologies to digital and green transition, the twin transition so-called, for Europe's resilience and competitiveness as a whole. And if we talk about the kind of European approach to digitalization, we have to see that the approach is usually seen as human-centric, sustainable, and kind of more prosperous digital future aiming kind of activity. And the human-centric kind of approach is very much in the core of the discussion right now. Can I have the next slide, please? If we are talking about the kind of European way to approach general purpose technologies like artificial intelligence, it is based on trust. And these trust questions are also in the very core of regulation as well. And we are now facing a era where Europe is going to regulate artificial intelligence. We are right now in a phase when the regulation on European approach for AI and coordinated action plan for AI has been published only a couple of weeks ago. And if I look at from the Finnish perspective, I will come back to also the policy questions, what we have been tackling here in Finland, what is kind of the case AI from the Finnish perspective. And maybe I have to describe also Finland as an environment where regarding the technology development, what is happening here. But if we first kind of try to look as a whole into Europe, we have to talk about also what kind of environment Europe is to create knowledge, to create new technologies, to take advantage of them also in a good way. And in Europe, the contrast is very striking in producing knowledge compared to turning it into innovation, growth, and well-being. Europe is basically kind of the scientific powerhouse, and we have all the necessary ingredients to shape prosperous and safe future. We have 1.8 million researchers working in thousands of universities and research centers. We have only 7% of world's population and 24% of global GDP, but we produce around 30% of world scientific publications. So we can talk about Europe's innovation deficit since we are not lacking knowledge or ideas, but Europe does not capitalize enough the knowledge we have and we produce here. Japan produces 3 times more quality patents applications than EU does. The amount of venture capital available in EU is only 1/5 of the one in the US, for example, and the number of fast-growing startups, so-called unicorns, the share of the European unicorns is also equal 1/5 to the US numbers. And this is a question that is hard to tackle for Europe, but the kind of standing point is that we should be able to scale up these innovations, scale up the knowledge into well-being of the European citizens also inside Europe through better businesses, use of that technology, and artificial intelligence is a very good case of this. I will come back to the question why a bit later on. If we dig into the European position in global data-driven innovation and AI race, we are, of course, behind US and China right now. And the major challenge is for Europeans the availability of data. How to make the data accessible and usable for both academia and businesses. One of Europe's challenge is the slow adaptation rate of advanced digital technologies in industry, especially in SMEs. And this is also very true to Finland as well. And when I go into the kind of policy-making questions of Finland, I will present you some ideas what we're going to do about this question. But it's not only Finnish problem, it's also a European kind of fight to tackle as a whole. We need a digital and coherent digital and data policy in Europe, and as I mentioned, the regulation and European approach for AI and coordinated action plan for AI is already published a couple of weeks ago here in Europe. And the legislative package is promising to some extent, but at the same time, I'm a bit concerned how it actually turns out for the European institutions, whether it is research organizations, universities, researchers, or companies wanting to build their future on developing these technologies. And since we are very trust-based, we want to see the people-centric approach to these technologies. We tend to over-regulate technologies too early. And this is my main concern about the European approach. We do need, for example, trustworthy data. Europe although the trust relies on data, how data is collected, shared, produced, protected, and used. And we have, for example, in Finland, national legislation regarding the use of data in healthcare, the secondary usage of healthcare data. We have specific regulation on that in Finland, and it has worked actually quite well. But it does not regulate technologies. It does not regulate how the data is from technology's point of view used, but it regulates the fact that it has to be handled with care, since it is personal data. It is something that we have to keep safe, and at the same time there has to be trust also in the system where we take advantage of that data that is mine and my neighbors when we are, for example, doing research based on that data, or also, for example, providing new knowledge and new drugs and that kind of innovation based on that data. So legislation is very much needed indeed, but not too early, and not kind of regulating the technology itself, but kind of how to use the technology and so that it is a future-proof approach, a technology-neutral approach. And so that, for example, the smaller businesses do not inflict with unnecessary administrative burden. This is the same also, for example, researchers and universities as well. But the hurdles are going to be very big if the administrative burden is going to be too big, especially for small companies. Can I have the next slide, please? Well, where does this kind of ideas and insight come from when we have opinions about the European legislation? We have on our background a national AI program that was established 2017, and it was run to 2019. It was a couple of years of very successful policy making and development indeed. The program was led by Mr. Pekka Ala-Pietilä, who is a former Nokia C-suite leader, and at the same time it was owned, I could basically say, by the whole society. At the same time, I will give you an example what kind of activities we did in that program. But it, from my point of view, it actually created a movement for this kind of technology area. And the objective of the program was to make Finland a leader in the application of artificial intelligence. It enhanced also research and development innovation in the area of artificial intelligence. And we had also a quite broad approach in telling people, first in Finland, but then also in Europe and more generally, what AI actually is, how it is used, what does it mean. And making AI more approachable was actually one of the successes that we had in the Finnish AI program. Can I have the next slide, please? One of the outcomes of the policy program was a very concrete example of education, a course called Elements of AI. It is a free online course introducing the basics of artificial intelligence. And by the end of last October, more than 500,000 students or people as a whole from more than 110 countries had enrolled the course. And it has been also a European success since we held the EU presidency a couple of years ago. And and we actually also gave that course as a present to all the European countries. It was available in English, but now it's available in all European countries inside EU member states. And this is one example that policymakers can do to also build trust in technologies. And from that point of view, I wish that we will have this kind of successes in different technology areas also in the future. One good example of this kind of approach could be, for example, quantum computing. You can read about it. Probably you know more about it than I do, but it's now in the phase where you actually can read about it also in the basic newspapers. But at the same time, if you ask somebody to explain quantum computing to you, you probably, if they are not kind of into the question, you're probably not going to get that good answers. And we are going to also need the kind of education part when we are talking about these new technologies, what kind of impact they have in the societies, and what kind of, for example, regulation we need, since those questions are also in the same discussion tables than any other regulatory issues. So from my point of view, this kind of approach is very good indeed in tackling new technologies and also the policy questions. Can I have the next slide, please? The next question is that where are we standing right now in Finland in policymaking? The first AI program was very successful indeed, and everybody was asking what then? What's the next question? And now I come back to the kind of the European struggles of enhancing digitalization as a whole, and especially the role of SMEs. We put in place the new program called Artificial Intelligence 4.0, which you can kind of read in the headline that it combines two different worlds together. Artificial intelligence as a technology, and then 4.0 comes from Industry 4.0, kind of the next industrial revolution. That is the one which is coming from applying these technologies. And this is why we actually took the next phase more from the kind of industrial policy point of view. What can we do to help, especially the SMEs, but the companies that are not the spearhead tech companies, but are a bit lagging behind? How can we help them to take advantage of these technologies, be able to pilot, to kind of see what kind of opportunities these technologies bring to them? And that's the core of the kind of next phase policy making in Finland when we are talking about artificial intelligence. It is not the only approach. We are, of course, at the same time, very much focused on the European discussion, since what is happening on the legislative area in Europe has a direct impact to Finland as well. And since Finland is a kind of tech-savvy nation, we are not afraid of technologies as a whole, as a nation, as people. And we kind of look quite curiously into new technologies, new opportunities on that side. We want to bring that approach also to the European discussion, so that Europe wouldn't be that afraid as it usually is when it's kind of regarding new technologies and new opportunities. We tend to take it with caution. Of course, it is about artificial intelligence as technology. We are continuing to support research, for example, in the area of artificial intelligence. In the last program period, we financed the Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence in Finland. And I hope that this kind of research is going to grow in Finland as well as long in, and also the international collaboration in this area. We can enhance that as well. And then the fourth focus area on the next program period is, of course, how to use technology digitalization in enhancing sustainable development as a whole, and how to transition towards a carbon neutral society. Our current government has set the goal that Finland should be carbon neutral by the year of 2035. And that is really fast. And we are going to need all the help from all these technologies we only can get to meet that target. And we are also directing very much R&D financing towards this goal in the upcoming couple of years. Can I have the next slide, please? So the vision for Finland is, as one European country, you have to keep in mind that we are only 5.5 million people. So we really don't make it by ourselves. We need all the good partnerships and good collaboration there is available. But our vision for 2030 is that Finland is the Finnish manufacturing industry will be clean, efficient, and digital, and this is kind of the main goal from the industry policy perspective. But at the same time, this is of course not the only goal. We have to tackle the technological kind of problems that will get along. We have to make sure that the European legislation on AI is going to be fair from all point of view, not only fair for citizens, but also fair for businesses, fair for research, and so on. And we have to say that we are able to scale the knowledge we create in Europe also into kind of success in Europe. And that I think we will need smart money, that will need a lot of courage, encouraging, and that will need also a lot of collaboration between different stakeholders. And myself, I trust very much in the good collaboration between academia and companies. From my point of view, that is one of the kind of best cooperations that create prosperity, well-being, and also a very good future for the Finnish society, but as well for the Europe and for the whole world. So I thank you at this point. The next slide, I think will say that as well, if you put that on. And I'm looking forward to your questions on this area. Thank you very much.
Okay, I have here questions in waiting. Thank you, Ilona. Well, we're starting off with some rather philosophical ideas. We have tons of questions. I really hope we can cover all of this.
I hope I can
interesting. Yeah. Victor is interested in a book, Cathy O'Neill's book, Weapons of Math Destruction. That's kind of like saying that when we use mathematical models or artificial intelligence solutions, that these things could somehow like reproduce, highlight, or worsen social injustice or like bias or discrimination, and that we would have to be very cautious to like consciously, actively try to counter or eliminate these kinds of negative effects. Have you experience of trying to enforce that we wouldn't be drifting into some kind of a technological dystopia?
Technologies are neutral. And I also always get this question very often, actually, and my answer always is that you have to see, well, the good guys can use technology and the bad guys can use technology, and all you can do is make sure that there are more good guys than bad guys, and there will always be the kind of the bad purpose in using this kind of technologies. You cannot get rid of it, but at the same time, if you are using the technologies for good, you are also regulating the use of these technologies in a way that you kind of take away, for example, biases in use of data, and be cautious about how you use your information models and so on. I very much trust that usually technologies can be also a method for creating a better world. One of my favorite examples is for example, voice recognition. In digitalization and in bringing services home, for example, in elderly care. since digitalization nowadays still is, voice recognition is taking more room right now, but still digitalization looks like this. You have to be able to use some kind of device to do whatever you want digitally. But at the same time, artificial intelligence and voice recognition together, you can teach your AI. If you can teach your grandkids, you can also teach your AI in the future. And this is one of the best examples where technologies can help to get over that hurdle that looks like this. And I'm really looking forward to that world. And I trust that there are more good guys than bad guys in developing these solutions.
I'm not personally really worried about the bad guys, but I'm really worried about the ignorant. Like people who don't really know what they're doing and they think they're doing the world a favor. Like someone trained them a model of an artificial intelligence that looks at people's faces and says if they're a criminal or not. And then some idiot's going to think that this is a good idea. And no one's trying to be evil. People are just being confused. And then someone gets denied a heart transplant because the system was trained in the wrong way to think that that person wasn't really valuable, and it just all goes south from there. But I'm really afraid of the ignorance. But I really like this the Finnish initiative of like making massively available courses so that the public in general and people in the industry can understand what artificial intelligence is, because I really do think we urgently need something like this in Mexico, because neither the people in the government nor the public in general is very aware of what this is. So they're easily tricked into spending money into pointless solutions that are never going to work, or they are afraid to use actual productive, helpful services because they think it's some kind of an invasive big brother thing, and they don't see the value or trust that their privacy would be in somehow well treated. Touching this point, Alberto is asking about how easy it is to get private sector to collaborate with like regulation and doing things right and being the good guys. Do they need supervision? Do they need incentive? How do you get the companies to do the right thing?
We launched a challenge on self-regulation of AI. It was called the Ethic Challenge, and in a couple of days we got about 60 companies on board, and the number was and counting, one could say. And I think this is a kind of good example of what kind of approach to take with companies. You have to regulate them, of course. You have to give incentives in different kind of incentives, but at the same time, for example, the self-regulation part is promising from my point of view. Also, give the public, the private sector possibility to regulate themselves, and also show that when they are developing the solutions, what should be taken into account. But self-regulation alone is not enough. From my point of view, I think we also need solid regulation as well.
Do you think it's a good idea to combine like funding with regulation, that the companies who receive funding for like research and development are kind of like piloting or pioneering certain regulations, certain procedures that will eventually be applied to everybody? But they would kind of be like, you get to do this if you help us define these regulations and if you help us define the process that's going to be followed? Or should it just be like imposed and everybody has to deal with it?
I don't know whether it should be kind of paired to financing, but usually they go hand in hand. That kind of approaches, they are called regulatory sandboxes usually, where you kind of have a trial on a regulation, how to develop regulation. A good example from Finland on regulatory sandbox is autonomous shipping. And the same ecosystem that is developing AI-based solutions on autonomous shipping have also a area, it's called Jacob Sea, it is a physical area in the archipelago where they can run their trials, and at the same time, when they are using the demo area, the sea, Jacob Sea, they are also actually taking part in a regulatory sandbox kind of approach where we try to figure out how to regulate this kind of activities in transport in the future. So I think, yes, they go well hand in hand, but I wouldn't couple them up so that when you get financing, you have to take part in this demonstration or whatever. But I think that these companies that do develop the new technologies, they are basically positive about also piloting and taking part in this kind of demonstration. So, for example, using the regulatory sandboxes.
Yeah, I think the sandboxes are like a very good idea, and like not only at like a national level, but like at an organizational level too, like changing a new process into something a little stricter and just like trying it out first to kind of like try to smoothen it a little bit. Gerardo's interested in the set of like what's acceptable use of AI that European Union has recently made public. Were you participating in that? Was somebody from Finland in it? Like, do you have any feelings about whether it was, like, let's say, sufficient, a good start, should be better, if there's something too much there? What do you think?
The kind of the regulatory approach on AI, the package that we received, we were quite active in the early discussions. There was a European high-level expert group that made actually several reports on this area before the legislative process began at the EU level. And that was also actually led by Mr. Pekka Ala-Pietilä, the same man who was chair of the national program. And that was one of the successes also from our national program work, that he was then also chairing the European high-level expert group. And from that point of view, we were very active in the early phase. And of course, since one of the member states, we have been taking part also in the development later on. And now we are in the phase where actually we just arranged a hearing in Finland for all the organizations that are touched somehow by this new regulation. And we had quite a success. We had very many top-notch researchers on, we had companies on, we had also, of course, the other parts of society as well. But it was a good start for the discussion of this phase, how to give feedback to Europe now from all kind of stakeholders in Finland.
This involvement of the researchers and companies together actually brings me to Uriel's question. Like, what's your experience, opinion, and kind of vision for how to bridge together the academy and the industry? I think that this academy willing to provide experts into panels and courses for people, it's a wonderful start. But we've also been talking to people from the software industry in Finland, and in their experience, the academics are a little like separate from what the industry is doing. Like they're kind of like going their separate ways in some senses in the questions of AI. Do you feel like the government's one of the things that's going to be pulling them together, or how should this go?
Well, I think where kind of spearhead technologies are being developed, I think that the best of both worlds are there already. And but what you can do is to enhance that through financing, and that's something we do actually quite a lot in Finland, where we create innovation projects, or it is written in the terms of financing that you should do it actually in partnerships on both sides, whether it is financing from Business Finland to researchers or for companies. And this is one of the most efficient ways to actually enhance cooperation between academia and businesses. But at the same time, I trust very much on researchers and the fact that they are usually a couple of years ahead of companies. Not that much on digitalization. I think there the technologies go very much hand in hand on both sides, but there are different areas where there could be actually years in between the top-notch research and then where the implementation is coming after. But in digitalization, they usually go quite hand in hand.
In practical terms, how's this regulation going to work? Like, how does one enforce something? Because the artificial intelligence part, it isn't always, let's say, visible. It's not on the surface of the product. It can be kind of like black boxed, hidden in between. What's the plan? How's Finland or European Union going to enforce the AI regulation? Is it just going to like, please don't do this, and we hope we notice if you do it? Or is there like a concrete plan on how to identify or intervene with violations of the rules?
Well, there is, but you are in the very core of the problem in a sense that somehow regulating it too much can turn your Excel sheet into AI. And at the same time, then you might be missing the kind of the next phase of development as a whole. And then you are kind of, you are not allowing people to use the wise tools they could use to be more efficient in their work, whether they are teachers giving grades or whatever. And this is the most difficult part, and this is why I think the approach should be that, and this has to do actually with the very first question. From my point of view, it should be regulated that what these technologies cannot do, what is not allowed as an end result, and then you leave the technology alone. Since you cannot kind of regulate technologies, you will be regulating technologies that are old enough to be regulated, and you are never going to catch the development with regulation. And
I agree fully.
That point of view,
like,
the use.
You can't say you can't. Yeah, the tool can't be forbidden. The math can't be forbidden. The algorithm can't be forbidden. The application of a thing, no matter how it's built for a certain purpose, could be forbidden.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. One thing that my students often hear complain, that when we're trying to do something like text-to-speech or speech-to-text or any voice recognition, facial recognition, that everything is so American, everything's in English, and it's difficult to do it in Spanish. And I'm like, oh, guys, you have no idea. So have you had any contact with the kind of like difficulties of taking existing technology that works marvelously in English, and then companies or organizations wanting to apply it in Finland, and as soon as you try to do it in Finnish, it just kind of like falls apart? Or have the Finnish researchers been able to kind of like catch up with how to make our semi-impossible language reasonable for computers?
Yes, we are doing quite a lot there, and as I mentioned, we are quite tech-savvy people in Finland. We have one kind of campaign ongoing, and it's called Give a Voice Gift. And it is about recording Finnish language, whatever it is. You can take the newspaper or you can take your car's manual or whatever, and you just read it aloud. And this is kind of, we are creating a voice database in Finnish, and this is also something that the researchers and developers have been interested coming abroad, since Finland is a very small language, and there are not so many that speak it, but at the same time it is a kind of innovation laboratory at the same time for these technologies. So yes, we have some approaches on there as well, but since I'm not the real tech person as you are, I'm not that into the technical questions that are problems that those companies are facing. But I know that they're kind of taking this as a hard fight that they want to win as well.
How about stuff like dialects? Because like we don't really know any Finnish people who speak like Finnish. Like to say I don't know in Finnish, you're supposed to say en tiedä. But if you ask my sister, she's going to say en mä tiedä. and it just doesn't sound anything like en tiedä. Does everybody have to talk like their best behavior to these AI systems, or is it contemplated that Finnish people can just sound as backward as they would like?
Well, I think a common, well, we don't have something like high Finnish. I think the kind of the common dialects are well known as well. That's kind of spoken language as well. I haven't heard any problems on this area actually, so I think that tells something.
I know that the British are struggling with this when they make like a voice recognition system for English that's spoken by the English, then the Scottish can't use it like at all. Like it's like, please speak English, and the Scottish just end up screaming at the system.
Yeah, but no, I haven't heard that actually as a specific question in Finland.
Well, it might be an interesting thing to figure out, like how dialect specific these things are going to be, because I think younger people kind of understand and are also willing to speak English or like limit their vocabulary when they're talking to a computer or a robot. But elderly people might not be as inclined to change their way of speaking.
Yeah, that's true.
So would you be willing to give like a kind of like a forecast, like what do you think that should be going on in Finland or in Europe in like 5 to 10 years in this field, or is it too rapidly moving to be able to set any goals?
Well, my view, if I look 5 to 10 years away from today, would be more global actually. I hope that in 10 years we would have some kind of global understanding how to regulate, how to make policy in the area of AI. I actually listened yesterday as a MIT seminar, this one, and the first panel was very, very interesting indeed. There was 2 former foreign ministers and high executives from OECD, and the discussion there was that the policy approach should be global, and I totally agree with that, since it's not going to work if we have an American model and a European model, a Chinese model and a Mexican model, and then an African model. If those don't somehow link together and build a common approach. And now, unfortunately, the development is very different in different parts of the world. And I think this should be an area where also a common understanding is created. And that's I would set that as a goal from the next 10 years.
So now when these like global policies are going to be defined, like public policies need to be defined, what's the role of the AI itself in defining these things? Because many policies are like kind of data driven, much depends on who's doing what, how much, where, what's the impact of it. How much can we incorporate the AI in like public policy definition in itself? And how much should we allow for it to affect the way AI itself is going to be like limited or guided by these policies? Would it be okay to make an AI that decides which research projects are going to be funded, or which insurance claims are going to be okay, which tax returns look suspicious? Like where, in which field should it go, and how much should it be able to kind of like guide its own path?
I think all the use cases you mentioned, AI is applied already, somewhere in the world at least. The insurance is clear. Mm-hmm. That's a use case that exists, I think, everywhere already. Research financing, I trust that somebody uses it already. We have some trials, for example, in Business Finland, where AI has a part in the kind of screening of applications. we don't have the legislation in place where we actually could use on public side automatic decision making yet. So you cannot get a decision from a public authority yet, which is based only on AI. There has to be a person still to kind of to digitally sign it at least. But there is a lot of use of AI, for example, in taxing area, usually to detect fraud more than well, it's also automation as well. So I think that is something those are kind of the good use cases, but the hard parts are where you actually are going to use that information to create policy. And that is where it becomes tricky. And we have the companies where you have AI as one of the board members already on the kind of board board table sitting there. And from my point of view, I think it's still more like a publicity stunt. But at some point, these technologies are going to affect also policymaking. We are not quite there yet, but it's going to happen soon. And how it's going to affect, I have no idea.
I'm actually kind of in favor still that like the decisions can't really be made by algorithms, but I would personally probably go for a model where whenever you get a decision from the government, it's going to say if it was an automated one or if it's been reviewed by a person. And then if it was an automated one, you would have like a very easy way to like request revision. Like I would like to have someone look at this. But then if it's automated and you're satisfied with it, no one would really have to do anything. But like my own idea of how to regulate it would kind of be like adding an easy, like a veto or a please someone look at this method for when the decision is automated, but not having some poor person have to go over like 20,000 things each day to say this one yes, this one doesn't, this one goes, this one doesn't, because that sounds kind of like demeaning. But I kind of like the thing that you use AI like pre-processing, filtering, ordering. And especially if someone's applying for something like a grant or a tax break or an insurance claim or whatever, it would be nice to have the AI interact with the person who's making the application, kind of like point out that the document you're attaching doesn't seem to be the thing you need. These numbers here kind of don't add up, to like help the person who's trying to make the process to make it as clear and easy as possible, so that they can kind of like preview that with what you're saying. The decision is probably going to be this. Do you want me to pass this to a person, so that the person doesn't have to do the back and forth, like you have forgotten to attach the document, you haven't specified your place of birth, and like whatnot. So there's a lot of assistive technology that we could make, but it does kind of sound fishy that a computer would tell you whether you're or not you were sentenced to jail, whether or not your taxes were fraudulent. So like, it kind of feels like you at least have a right to ask for somebody to look at it.
Yeah, and that's a part of good government procedures as a whole. You always have to have a route to kind of come back to the system that, hey, I wasn't treated fairly. I want to set a complaint or whatever. So that's a basic rule that should apply, whether there's automation, AI, whatever that behind the decision. I have a good example of where we could use it kind of fairly nowadays already, and we were a bit upset that we weren't able to use it as basis for the decision making. Now, due to the COVID crisis, we have some kind
Okay, we are back now. We had a tiny little Mexican detail in the electrical supply at Alberto's place. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. We've been talking to ourselves here. It took me the longest time to notice that we had even lost Alberto. He was asking us to repeat what we just said, but I really don't think we'll be able to. We were in great agreement on great detail, and but I do think that we should kind of be wrapping it up here. It's really late for Ilona, and it's Friday for everybody. And I think we've gotten a huge amount of very useful information on what's already being done regulation-wise, what should be done in the future, and then where this whole thing is going. I'm kind of hoping that this will motivate at least some of our students to be a little bit more active in the public sector, because I'm worried in Mexico about the gap between the academy and the political decision making. I kind of think that we should not necessarily become political decision makers, but we should totally be like their good buddies, that they call us up when they're confused about something or need orientation, so that the policy decision making isn't based on like sci-fi movies and confusion and propaganda, but like we could actually talk about the meaning and the capabilities of technologies and the dangers of blind trust to them. I think this has been extremely lovely, extremely useful. I hope Alan hasn't lost power, because I would like to give him a chance to thank Ilona, unless Ilona wants to give some final closing remarks.
Thank you for having me. It was true pleasure, and I had fun. Thank you.
Okay, Alan, it's on you.
It says, Universidad Autónoma de Nuevo León, through its Facultad de Ingeniería Mecánica y Eléctrica, present this certificate to Ilona Lundström for her participation with the talk, The Digitalization Policy in Finland, Case, AI, and the European Struggle. Congratulations, Ilona, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the excellent evening. Thank you.